Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. Thank you for joining me for my second video of the day. Now we are still talking about No Dime December. That's the name that's been given to the movement that was started by Jay Giggs, one of our content creators here in Raid. Now he is calling for a spending strike from all players in the month of December. The purpose of this strike is to get Plarium's attention and to get them to start a conversation with the player base about the direction of the game. Player dissatisfaction is at an all-time high, and we would like to see certain changes implemented in order to improve the player experience. Now, in my first video of the day, I reacted to Hell Hades' video entitled, "What Do We Want from Plarium?" Now, I highly recommend you go watch Hell Hades' video. You can watch my reaction to it as well, because I think the discussion is fairly complex and it requires a lot of input from a lot of places and a lot of details that need to be considered. Now, in this video, what I am going to do today is try to answer that question that HH asked, what do we want from Plarium? I think that's really important. I think we want to be clear about our requests or our, I don't really want to call them demands, but what would satisfy the player base? What would make us happy moving forward? And what would encourage us to spend again on this game? So if you're interested in my answer, if you want to see if it lines up with yours, stick around. Okay, now before I get started, I just want to ask you to do me a few favors to help spread this video out amongst the community, because I do think that the topic is very important. So one, go ahead and hit the like button. Two, if you can, put a comment in the comment section. It doesn't matter really what the comment is. It could just be a thumbs up. But the more engagement that the video gets, the more the algorithm will push that to new viewers. The third thing you could do is go ahead and link this video or my previous video from today to your Discord communities or your forums or your friend groups, so we can get as many eyes on this video as possible. And finally, if you're willing to go above and beyond, mention this video to the other content creators you follow, because I don't have direct access to those content creators, and I'd love to be part of the larger discussion. And I think that the more people that are involved in the discussion, the more likely we are to be effective as a group. Okay, so I wanted to start here on this website. This is smartlook.com. It is a blog. And this article is about mobile game analytics. Now, the reason I wanted to start here is twofold. One is in Hell Hades' video that I just reacted to this morning, there's a lot of financial sort of mumbo jumbo, a lot of acronyms, a lot of different terms that maybe the general population isn't as familiar with as people in the business world. Now, these terms, these ideas matter because they inform the mentality and the perspective of the people who work at Plarium and at Aristocrat, Plarium's parent company. And I think in order for our movement, our No Dime December movement, our spending strike, whatever you want to call it, I think in order for our movement to succeed, our No Dime December movement, whatever you want to call it, we have to do three really important things. The first is that we have to convince Plarium to come talk to us. And that is what the spending strike is trying to accomplish. It's not trying to hurt Plarium. It's not trying to mess up the game. It's not trying to hurt anybody's profits. What it's simply trying to do is bring Plarium to the table so that they engage with the community in a meaningful way. The player base has basically been ignored or disrespected even by Plarium. We have very little influence on the direction of the game. We have very little influence on the monetization practices, and we want that to change. That is some of the most dissatisfying aspects of the game. There are other concerns that we have, but until Plarium comes and is willing to discuss it with us in a meaningful way, change isn't going to happen. So the spending strike is doing the first thing, hopefully, getting Plarium to come to the table to talk to us. Now, the second thing that we have to do is exactly what HH asked. What do we want from Plarium? We have to have clear, actionable changes that Plarium can enact that would satisfy our dissatisfaction, that would alleviate our concerns and get us to enjoy the game again enough to consider spending at either our normal levels or maybe reduced levels or whatever levels feel appropriate to us as a community. And then the third thing that we need to do is we need to consider Plarium's perspective and Aristocrat's perspective. We need to speak their language and convince them that it is in their best interest to give us what we want. unless they also benefit from the arrangement, they're not likely to just cave. They would rather fight us than give us what we want if it's going to hurt their bottom line. So in order to address some of the financial terms that we're going to be discussing, and in order to get our headspace or our minds around the perspective of Plarium, I wanted to bring you to this article, Mobile Game Analytics, 6 Essential Metrics and How to Track Them. Now, this was just posted on October 3rd. You can see there is the author of the article. Now, I believe that this is an article that is really trying to sell a product to mobile game publishers that is going to help them basically track metrics for their game in order to maximize profits. Now, there are definitely more than 6 metrics. In fact, their product probably offers more than 6 ways to track metrics. But I want to talk about this article a little bit because it brings up several really interesting points that we're going to need to include in our discussions with Plarium to get them to see our side of things, but also to convince them that this is going to benefit them as well as us. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the parts of the article to you. I apologize, there isn't really a better way to do this, but I'm going to just start here at the top. It says, mobile game analytics tools are a vital part of any game developer's toolkit. They help you analyze what players are doing, calculate metrics and KPIs like daily active users or retention rates, and find bugs and other user experience issues. So KPI, if you've never come across that acronym before, is Key Performance Indicator. So this is talking about certain metrics that give more data about the performance of a product than some other indicators. So key performance indicators. The article goes on. However, merely knowing what's happening in your game doesn't tell you how to improve players' experience or boost your revenue. Now, it's really interesting that in that sentence, improving players' experience and boosting your revenue are tied together. This is the message that we're trying to communicate to Plarium. Okay, so now down here, there is this bullet point that is talking about how metrics are used in games. It says it's hard to analyze game mechanics and improve revenue, user retention, or other essential metrics. For example, it's relatively easy to track how many people bought a paid add-on for a character in your game. However, to understand why they did so, or why they didn't buy add-ons for other characters, you need to look at the entire experience from their point of view. Without that, you can easily draw misleading conclusions about players' behaviors. So I think this is really important because I think one of the mistakes that Plarium and Aristocrat maybe have made in the past is relying solely on metrics to tell them about the player experience. They don't really listen to us. They clearly don't take our feedback, so we can't conclude that they do anything else but ignore us. And if they are ignoring us, they don't know why we do the things we do. They simply know what we do, how often we do, maybe how much we do. But the reasoning behind what we do may be different than what they expect. Now, the article goes on to say, we'll first show you how to track these 6 essential mobile game metrics. There are these 6: daily active users, monthly active users, stickiness rate, retention rate, average revenue per daily active user. We saw that acronym a little bit differently in the report, the Aristocrat report that was in the previous video, and then in-game purchases. And we're not going to talk about all 6, but we're going to talk about a few key metrics here and what they mean for our movement and for how we have to talk to Plarium. Now, here is a subtitle area called The Impact of UX on Mobile Game Performance. UX is user experience. So in this article, we'll give you more than a handful of KPIs and a few tips to boost them. Our goal is to help you create a seamless gaming experience based on the wealth of user experience data you have at your disposal. Now, understanding user experience design factors into mobile game performance is the first step towards reaching this objective. Basically, what this article is saying is understanding what the user experience is allows you to improve that experience and drive revenue. Now, let's talk here first about player engagement. So it says it's no secret that engaged players are more likely to invest time and money into your game. Engaged players are more likely to invest time and money into your game. And here's how UX design shapes player engagement. So this is talking about 3 ways to increase or improve player engagement. The first is intuitive onboarding. A well-designed onboarding process ensures new players quickly understand game mechanics and feel competent from the start. Players who effortlessly grasp the basics are more likely to continue playing. So we all know that Raid doesn't do this very well. The tutorial system is old. It wasn't good when it was created. There's a lot more in the game now, and they really haven't improved the onboarding process. Players are overwhelmed quickly, and they often leave the game because they feel like they don't understand how to progress in the game. In fact, I think the best onboarding system available to Raid is the content creators. We do the work that they should be doing, which is helping players understand how to play the game. Now, the second point here is visual and auditory appeal. So engaging graphics, animations, and sound design contribute to a game's overall allure. Now, Raid has that in spades. They are crushing it with visual appeal. But I will say that in the 4 years since Raid has launched, there have arisen some competitors who can match the visual appeal of Raid. So I think their advantage in this category is starting to slip and will continue to do so as the game ages. The third thing here is a responsive user interface, or UI. Frustration caused by clunky menus or confusing layouts can drive players away. And this is another area where I think Raid is probably about average, maybe slightly below average. There are definitely aspects of the UI which are not intuitive and are clunky and can be very frustrating. The good news is I think some of those are relatively easily fixable, but that will be on the list somewhere. Okay, now let's talk about player retention. Because I think this is going to be a key aspect of how we approach communicating with Plarium. It says, once you've attracted new gamers, you need to retain them. A game's user experience design plays a pivotal role in keeping players coming back for more. So now it says smooth performance, intriguing content, and personalization. I think there are a lot of things here, a lot of points you can read through them that are really good, but player retention matters. And I don't think Raid has ever emphasized or focused on player retention. Their business model has been to bring in new players as quickly as possible so that when they lose players, they still have enough daily active users paying for the game to generate enough revenue or to meet their revenue goals. So we saw in the previous video, in the information that HH provided, that Pixel United, which is the gaming division of Aristocrat, like the mobile gaming division of Aristocrat, lost 900,000 daily active users from 2022 to 2023. And I think that reflects an overall lack of focus on player retention. So we're going to be talking more about this later in this video. Now, the monetization strategy is going to be a big part of our complaints as the player base. It does say here that in-game purchases, a great design seamlessly integrates in-game purchases into the gaming experience, making them easily accessible rather than disruptive. I would say we all think that Raid's system of getting us to purchase stuff is pretty disruptive. They're constantly throwing pop-ups at us, and it never feels seamless. It also doesn't feel like good value. Now, there's no ad integration in Raid, which is great, so we can go ahead and skip that. And we can also kind of skip the subscription models. There are sort of different ways you could subscribe to Raid, but we're going to leave that aside for now. Okay, so now we get to those 6 essential mobile game metrics. Now, there are 2 categories. And as you can see, it says here, there are 2 fundamental categories of metrics that nearly all companies in the gaming industry need to track: user engagement and monetization. The first 4 metrics on this list measure aspects of user engagement, while the last 2 can help you determine if your monetization strategy is working. Now, I think our complaint is that the monetization strategy is not working. We don't know what their metrics are. We don't know what their metrics say, but this is the argument that we're going to be making. Before we begin, keep in mind that both metric types are inherently connected. The more fun and engaging your game, the more chances you have to increase revenue. That's true whether your game makes money through ad revenue, monthly subscriptions, or microtransactions. So this is really important. The more fun and engaging your game, the more chances you have to increase revenue. If we improve the game, that is healthy for the players, and that is healthy for Plarium. Profits will go up if the gaming experience improves. All right, now let's actually look at the metrics here. So the big metrics here are daily active users, which is DAU. That's simply the number of people who log in per day. Monthly active users is the number of unique players who log in per month. Now, these are two metrics that you can track independently, but the combination of these two help you understand player engagement and player retention. So if we look down here, this phenomenon is described as stickiness rate. So your game's stickiness rate is the ratio between daily active users and monthly active users. So basically the idea behind stickiness is how many monthly active users show up every single day. So for instance, if you have 1,000 monthly active users and you have 50 show up per day, then that's a pretty low stickiness rate. Whereas if you had 500 show up per day, that would be a much higher stickiness rate. Basically, this is about players playing your game on a daily basis, logging in every day. So I do think that stickiness rate is something that Plarium clearly tracks. They're trying to constantly keep us in the game, constantly get us back into the game, because they know that when players are in the game, they are likely to spend in the game. And when they're not in the game, guess what? They're not thinking about the game, so they're not going to spend. Now, we have retention rate here, and this is really simple. This is how many players download your game and start to play, and then how many players basically stick around. So there's a rate, right? People leave the game at a certain rate. Now, there's a statement here that I want you to pay attention to. It says, similar to stickiness, the better your mobile game retention, the more chances you have to increase users' lifetime value, LTV. We're going to talk about that more. Also, retaining existing customers is much cheaper than bringing in new ones. Okay, so we got two really important things here. Lifetime value is the amount of money that a player will spend over the lifetime of their account playing a game. So if you play for a year, or if you play for 2 years, or if you play for 3 years, but in all three scenarios you spend only $100, then your lifetime value is $100. If you play for 10 minutes and spend $200, then your lifetime value is $200, even though you've only played for 10 minutes. So lifetime value is a metric that companies really care about because that actually translates into revenue. However, the second part here is really important. Retaining existing customers is much cheaper than bringing in new ones. In the previous video, Hell Hades talked about how the drop off in daily active users that Pixel United experience may be the result of a decrease in marketing budget. Basically, the idea is if you're not spending money on marketing, you're not bringing in new players. But my response to that was players have to be leaving for the number of players to go down. If you didn't bring in any new players, but nobody left, your numbers would be the same from year to year. So clearly what happened was more players left than joined. However, here it says that retaining existing customers is much cheaper than bringing in new ones, and that's what we've got to communicate to Plarium. We are existing customers, and it is easier to keep us here and cheaper to keep us here than it is to go and try to replace us. Now, the next metric here we have to understand is average revenue per daily active user. I believe in the investor presentation that we saw in the previous video that Aristocrat calls this average bookings per daily active user. So they use the term bookings, and so there's a B there instead of an R. But it's the same metric. It's the exact same metric. Now, basically what this is their total revenue per day divided by the number of active users that day. The higher the number, the more revenue they're generating. Okay, so that's all that we really need to know to start to formulate our approach and answer that question, what do we want from Plarium? So now I'm going to take you to my presentation about that exact topic. Okay, so here we are, and as you can see on this first page, I use a lot of the terminology that we just read in that article, also some terminology from the investor presentation that HH presented us with. But I want to make this clear. I think that having specific demands, like you need to change, the market in the game, I think those things are less important. I think those things create noise and get in the way. Those are executionable details, but they don't address the overall problem, right? It's like putting a Band-Aid on a cut. It's like if it's infected, you need to do something more than just cover it up. So I want to actually kind of create an approach here. I want to get us all on the same page. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to refine our communication down to one real demand. Okay, this is the central point that we're all, I think, dissatisfied with. And so if we're going to make one demand of Plarium, I think it has to be this. Make player satisfaction your guiding principle. Right? That's what we want. We want our satisfaction in the game to be your concern, rather than treating us as a resource that you can farm and get money from and then discard. Treat us as valuable. Respect us as people. Respect our investment in your game, and celebrate the game with us. We love the game. We love the game you created. So give us some of that love back. And if you watch any of Jay Gig's video, that is clearly one of the things that he is most upset with. He feels like Plarium hates us. Now, I addressed that in my previous video. I don't think they necessarily hate us. I don't think most people do, but they certainly act in a way that could indicate, at the very least, disregard. And so we want to change that. So I think our one demand of Plarium is make player satisfaction your guiding principle. Now, remember I said we needed to do 3 things, and then one of them is communicate clearly what we wanted. So we're going to get to that. The second thing is we have to bring Plarium to the table, and we're hoping that not spending in December will do that. But the third is we've got to convince them that it's in their best interest to listen to us. And so that's what this page is about. I want to tell Plarium how focusing on player satisfaction will increase revenue, because it will. Remember what that article was just talking about. If you can increase the players or improve the player's experience, that will drive revenue. So these are 6 different ways that I believe that focusing on our one demand and making player satisfaction the guiding principle will result in an increase in revenue for Plarium. Okay, so the first thing is that if you make player satisfaction your guiding principle and you're actually competent at your job, which I think Plarium is, that will improve the current player satisfaction. So the current player base that is in-game right now will be happier. That is going to increase those metrics we were talking about. Is going to increase stickiness, right? That means people will log in more frequently because they're having a better experience. So they're not going to want to avoid the game. They're going to be drawn into the game. It will improve retention. New players that join the game will also have increased satisfaction and therefore will stay at a higher rate than they currently are staying. They will abandon the game less frequently. It will increase the number of daily active users, because if you are holding on to your current player base and you're bringing new players into the game who are staying in the game, you can't help but drive up the numbers of players in the community. And finally, this will increase the lifetime value of the players' accounts, because the more players that stick around and the longer that they stick around, the more likely they are to continue to spend money. Remember that players spend on games that make them happy. They don't spend on games that they hate. Okay, number 2, we're going to improve player and content creator reviews. Players are going to go out and say, this is a very satisfying game. They're going to tell their friends, you should play this game. Content creators aren't going to be complaining about the game. They're going to be raving about the game. They're going to be trying to find ways to draw in new players, because new players mean new viewers for content creators. So as long as the game is good and I don't have to lie to my viewers and tell them it's good when it's not, then I'm going to get more viewers by being positive about the game. Now, all of this is going to maybe not increase revenue. It could, because it could pull in more players, but it could just reduce your marketing costs. Content creators and players who are playing the game and give reviews, that's free marketing. We are spreading the word about the game without you spending a dime. Now, the third way this is going to increase revenue is it will increase new player downloads. So that will increase your number of daily active users. New player downloads, we already know that from 2022 to 2023, Pixel United lost 900,000 daily active users. If you can increase the number of people who are joining the game, that's going to help raise that number back up. It's going to improve community confidence in Plarium. This is huge. This is incredibly important. The players don't trust Plarium. The content creators don't trust Plarium. The media doesn't trust Plarium. Nobody trusts Plarium. Why? Because they have shown again and again that for everything that they give us, they demand something in return. They never are focused on our satisfaction as players. They are focused on giving us the least amount that they can that will cost them anything, and then extract the most that they can that will profit them. And we want to change that equation. We want to say, if you give us value, we will give you value. If you give us a fun, pleasurable, satisfying gaming experience, we will reward you with in-game purchases. So if we do this and we feel like we improve the game, and now that we trust Plarium, if we trust that they will abide by that agreement, that's going to increase the average revenue per daily active user. People will spend more per day because they're going to trust that they're getting value for their dollar. And this is going to happen in a bunch of different ways. But again, as you increase spending, the LTV of each account is also going to go up. Now, one of the ways that improving community confidence will result in increased revenue is something that I don't think Plarium has ever considered. And it is that you will convert free-to-play players to spenders. Right? I am a free-to-play player, but I am not a free-to-play player who has no money. I have money that I can spend on games. In fact, I spend on games frequently. I don't spend on this game because I don't trust Plarium. I don't trust that they are going to give me value for my money, and I don't trust that they have my best interests at heart. So I choose not to spend. But if you gave me good value, and if you made me trust you, I would spend in your game just like I spend in other games. So you can convert at least some portion of your free-to-play players to spenders, and that's going to increase your average revenue per daily active user, plus it's going to increase the lifetime value of those formerly free-to-play accounts. Finally, by having a good game that focuses on player satisfaction, you are going to extend Raid's lifespan. Now, that is going to massively improve your lifetime value of accounts because the longer the game goes on, the more those accounts that are engaged in the game can spend. But it's also going to improve your margins. Your profit margins are going to continue to rise because the performance of the game won't drop off as much, and you won't have to continue investing the capital investment that you have already put into the game. You now have all of these in-game assets. New players have so much of the game to play. They can come in and play for 3 or 4 years and never get to the end of the game. That wasn't true initially. You had to continue to develop all those in-game assets. Well, now those assets are paid for. Now those assets exist. What that means is players are playing a game that you don't have to spend money to create anymore. All you have to do is keep it going. And that's a much smaller investment. And therefore, profit margins are going to increase. Additionally, if you can say to investors that the lifespan of this game isn't another 2 years, but another 10 years, that increases the value of that intellectual property. Raid now becomes much more valuable to investors in the long term. And that means more potential for spin-off investments, for sequels, for more animated series, for marketing opportunities like action figures or whatever it is that you want to do. The longer the life of an intellectual property, the more it becomes a part of the fabric of our culture. And then the more that asset can be leveraged for future profit. So I hope that this is convincing anybody from Plarium who's watching this that focusing on player satisfaction can drive revenue and increase the value of the game for Plarium and for Aristocrat. Now we have to talk about the No Dime December. What are we asking for? What are we asking from Plarium in this way? Like making player satisfaction your guiding principle. How do you go about doing that? And there really are three objectives that you need to employ in order to make player satisfaction your guiding principle. So objective number one, you need to create a more player-friendly economic model. The current model is whales first. And I think that Plarium needs to begin to move away from the whales first financial model. Now, this is tricky because I think one of the things that Plarium is scared of is that if they change their financial model, they will make players angry. They will make the whales who have already spent a lot of money angry by reducing the value of their accounts. And I would say that you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't have to make their accounts less valuable. I don't think that's the natural result of moving away from a whales first financial model. I think you just need to do some other things that are going to improve the overall feel of the game. All right, so how do we move away from the whales first financial model in a way that makes sense? Well, the first thing that I think we need to do is lower some overall price points. Now, as you lower prices, that is going to increase the volume of sales. But of course, the increase has to sort of outstrip the percentage that you reduce. So if you reduce a price, let's say you do a 20% price reduction on everything across the board, you now need to generate 25% in increased sales to maintain the same revenue, right? So a 20% price reduction requires 25% of increased sales. And that's just the way that math works. And it'll be different, with each price point. So for instance, if you reduce the price point by 50%, right? If you make anything that costs $100, $50, you now need to double the sales in order to match the revenue. In order to sell $100 worth of stuff, you need 2 sales instead of 1. So maybe that's a little bit more clear. But I do think that we need a significant cut in price points across the board. The question is, will this generate a higher volume of sales? Yes, of course it will. Will that higher volume be enough? It's hard to know. It's hard to know because it will be different at each price point. However, that's not necessarily the main consideration. What the main consideration should be is, does lowering overall price points increase player satisfaction? Because if it does, then it has a chance of increasing the number of daily active users per day by increasing player retention. And it has a chance to improve the LTV of an account by extending the life of that account. That player will play for longer. So by improving price points, you improve player satisfaction. And then all of those things that were true over here are now happening. Improved stickiness, improved retention, improved daily active users, improved, lifetime value of accounts. And even maybe the average spend might go up if players feel like they're getting more value for it. Now, the second thing we can do to create a more player-friendly economic model is to introduce more higher value offers for low to mid spenders. The whales first financial model is basically saying to everybody who doesn't spend very much, we don't care about your money. Now, I'll give you an example in game that is currently happening. The Xena pack, the Xena Pass, Champion Pass, is $40 and it's awful. And my guess is if you cut that down to $20, you would have more than doubled your volume of sales. And you would not have increased the number of whales who bought that pack. Every whale who was interested in Xena didn't blink at $40. They just bought the pack. And probably the exact same number of whales would have bought it at $60 or $80 or $100 or $200. Because if they're whales, they don't blink at $200. However, the mid spenders, some of them spent the $40. Some of them didn't. The low spenders, probably none of them spent, or very few of them spent the $40. Now, if you cut that down to $20, my guess is you would have more than doubled the sales. If you had cut it down to $10, my guess is you would have multiplied that sales by a factor of 10. I would have converted from a free-to-play player to a spender if the price point for that pass had been $10. Now, there would still be some people who were unhappy with that price point. They would have said that the champion should have been free, and that's something else to consider. But my point is, if you have good value for low spenders, a lot of low spenders will spend. They will feel comfortable spending, and free-to-play players will spend because they'll feel comfortable spending, and you will generate a lot more engagement along with a good amount of revenue. Now, the final thing I want to talk about here is reduce, or at least I would prefer you remove, but at least reduce the nickel and dime tactics. And the nickel and dime tactics are pretty simple. Every single day, there's a new way for us to try to spend money in Raid. And it can be a little bit here, a little bit there. But I do think that one of the nickel and dime tactics that you see very frequently is anytime we get something new in the game, there is a trade-off. There's always something that requires you to potentially spend built into the mechanic just in case. So you're having trouble getting, vault space, you want to get more vault space, you need to spend a lot of silver, and the silver keeps climbing and climbing and climbing to astronomical amounts. And now the only way to get that amount of silver is to grind for like 10 days or to spend gems or to buy silver in the shop. Why make that painful? Why nickel and dime me for a few hundred gems when you could just get to 5 million silver and keep it there? For every row of 10 in the vault, you could just do that. I would pay 5 million silver. Think it was a little bit high, but basically be okay with that. And as long as it didn't climb above 5 million, I'd be like, oh, that's great. Why create a clan insignia system where you can only save it twice before you have to start saving with gems? Because Plarium believes that changing your insignia is something that players are going to want to do. And so they should have to pay for it. But they shouldn't. It improves player satisfaction. And if you don't charge them for it, they will be more satisfied with it. And the amount of money that you're going to get out of your player base for those specific gems, just because they want an additional chance to change their insignia, is so minuscule. It's not worth the bad feelings. It's not worth, the hurt and the frustration of the player base for pennies you're getting by adding that inconvenience. So remove those nickel and dime tactics. Stop doing it. Just give us good content and we will spend on the avenues that you already have in the game. You don't have to keep creating new avenues for us to spend. You don't. We don't want new avenues to spend. We want the same old avenues, and we want those avenues to be better. Okay, now objective 2 is to make the player experience the core concept of game design. Now, this is really, really important. Remember that we talked about making player satisfaction the most important thing. Well, that means that players need to be satisfied by the game design, by the things that come into the game. And so the very first thing that a game developer should be doing, that Plarium should be doing, is talking to the player base. So player feedback should help select and design improvements to the game. If you are asking for feedback and completely ignoring your player base, then you are reducing player satisfaction. In 2 ways. One, they feel disrespected because they asked for something and you ignored them, or they asked you to take something away and you ignored them. So that is a form of disrespect that gamers are smart. They know that they're being ignored. The second thing that is dissatisfying is that the new game design doesn't actually give them what they asked for. So now they're dissatisfied with the game as well. They're unhappy with Plarium and they're unhappy with Raid. And that is going to mean your player retention is going to go down. Players going to leave the game, or they're at the very least going to spend less. So listen to your players, get their feedback, and let that guide you. You don't have to listen to every single thing a player says. The players are going to disagree with each other as well. But when you have players who ask for something for a long time repeatedly and never get it, they feel like their developers don't care about them. And in fact, that's pretty good evidence that the developers don't care about them. All right, the second thing here is respect players' time in-game by streamlining gameplay in reasonable ways. Now, I did add reasonable ways here because all games have some grindiness, and the value of the exciting moments is increased by their rarity, right? Like, you can't make them so rare that they're incredibly frustrating, but if they're too common, then they become less exciting. So we do want to streamline the game, but think of it this way. I think it is reasonable that a successful mobile game could have their players engaged for somewhere between, say, 2 and 5 hours a day. I think that more than 5 hours a day is extremely intrusive and it's problematic culturally, personally. It's too much time to require. Now, if you have optional stuff that players can do to play more hours, that can be great. People can maybe save up. They can play 1 hour a day and then the next day play 7 hours. That might be okay. But to require 5 hours a day of game time seems extreme. I think for casual players would like to spend less than 2 hours. Hardcore players might like to spend 4 or 5 hours, maybe even a little bit more, but that should be something they can opt into. So we need to streamline gameplay, especially as the game gets bigger. As you add more and more content, you need to find ways for players to save more and more time on the other content in order to keep the balance. If you just double the content in the game and that doubles the time requirement, you're making the player experience burdensome. It's awful. I hate it. I hate it. It's the thing I hate most about Raid, and it's the one thing that I would change above everything else, is if you could cut my time in-game down by like 50%, oh my God, my life would get so much better. So, streamline gameplay. Really simple ways would be, for instance, in Minotaur, take that up to stage 20 and make it a permanent super raid, right? Give me more scrolls per run and give me fewer runs per time. If you could do both of those things, you have streamlined my gameplay in a reasonable way. One way you've done a great job with this, Plarium, is with the quick battle on Clan Boss. Now, not everybody loves that system, right? They don't think it's the best system that you could have created, but most people really appreciate that they don't have to sit there for potentially 20, 30, 40 minutes and watch Clan Boss runs happen. There are a lot of community suggestions about how to streamline gameplay in reasonable ways. Pick 5 of them. Pick one every month for the next year. Do something to increase the streamlining of the gameplay so that we don't have to spend so much time in game. It won't reduce the amount of money we spend. It won't. It'll probably increase the amount of money we spend. Okay, the third one is remove or reduce unnecessary pain points, such as excessive gating, RNG, and resource usage. So I already talked a little bit about this when I was talking about the nickel and dime stuff, right? But there are also unnecessary pain points in the game that are just sort of poor game design. Maybe the most obvious one is the Arbiter missions, right? You have a system where in order to get your Arbiter, you need to level up the Great Hall. In order to level up the Great Hall, you need to play the arena. But the Great Hall is gated not just by acquiring medals, but acquiring medals of advancing metal types. So you've got to get, gold medals to get all the way to 10 to get your Arbiter. But there's also gating in the arena because you can't get gold medals without being in the gold arena tier. So PvP is already gated. PvP is gated by the difficulty of the players that you're playing against. It's a natural gating system. In addition to that, you have the gating of the Great Hall. In addition to that, you have the grading of the medals of the different colors in the Great Hall. In addition to that, that gates you in terms of your Arbiter missions. And Arbiter helps you in the arena, which helps you get more medals, which helps you in the Great Hall. It feels like a catch-22. It's really unnecessary. You don't have to do that. You could make all the medals one color. That reduces one gate without opening the floodgates and letting everybody just get Arbiter really easily, but it rewards long-time committed players. If a player can grind silver enough and get their Arbiter without ever having to worry about getting into gold, that doesn't hurt your game. That improves player satisfaction. Okay. Additional, systems like the RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG, that's really frustrating and most players hate it. So find a way to remove some RNG from the game, not all, but some RNG from the game, and give systems that would allow players more control. So if that comes to items or ascensions or blessings, whatever it happens to be, a little bit less RNG and a little bit more control, even if it's grindy control, even if it's control that comes from grinding out the game. Again, that rewards your committed players, and that's going to increase your player satisfaction. The fourth one here is match or exceed the current industry standards for the genre. This is something that you're going to have a problem with, Plarium. This is creeping up on you. There are games that have launched in the last year that are starting to attract your player base away from Raid. And part of the reason is because they focus more on player satisfaction than you. But we've already talked about how their graphics are catching up to yours. Their game design is catching up to yours. They're using you as the model and then improving the model. And you are still the model, but you're not improving. So what you need to do is match or exceed, innovate, exceed the current industry standards for the genre. And that's going to make you the #1 goal destination game for mobile game players again. Okay, now the third objective here is focus significant and consistent effort on improving gameplay. This is really important for a large portion of the community. So I'm talking about improving current gameplay. Now, I know that new content is coming down the pike, and that's great. We all love new content, especially if it's executed well. But the current gameplay isn't awesome in every case. And a lot of times what happens is Plarium drops gameplay, tweaks it maybe once, maybe twice in like the first 2 or 3 months, and then never touches it again. And as a result, a lot of gameplay is left sort of in a middling state where it's okay, it's passable, it's barely acceptable, but it's not fun, it's not encouraging, it's not making people excited about playing the game. So there are some ways that you can improve on improving gameplay. The first is to respond quickly to address community complaints about gameplay. This should be a focal point for all developing publishers, like all game developers. If your community complains about gameplay, fix that gameplay. If there's a patch that if you have to hot fix it, if you have to get a fix into the game for a single champion, for a single fight, for a single issue, do it. Do it as quickly as you can all the time. I swear to God, I've been part of so many game communities. The #1 way you can get a gaming community behind you is to respond to their complaints like that. Patch twice a week if you need to. It's this, I swear to God, it's the single way to get players to love you as a development company. Respond to their complaints instantaneously. As long as they're reasonable. As long as they're reasonable complaints. If they're glitches or if they're balance issues, respond quickly. Now, the second here is release regular patches specifically focused on improving game balance. Game balance matters. Game balance is nerfing and buffing champions. It's focusing on fights that have been in the game for a while that maybe need to be tweaked now that another 150 champions have been released since it was designed, and it's changed the difficulty or it's changed the balance of which champions are more or less valuable. Consider bringing the old school champions more in line with the current meta of design, right? Because the new champions that are getting released have different powers and different cooldowns and different stats, and they're just more valuable than the old school champions, who should still be valuable, but are less so in comparison. I think this should be something that happens all the time. A monthly patch specifically focused on improving game balance would be great. At least 4 or 5 times a year, this should happen, if not more. The third thing is include significant quality of life improvements in every single update. There should never be an update in the game. There should never be a normal update or normal patch that doesn't include at least one quality of life improvement. It should never happen. There are 50 that the community could list for you. Pick 3 per patch. It's still going to take you a 1.5 years to get them all done. So the fact that there are multiple patches that come out without a single quality of life improvement is incredibly frustrating to the community. But if you focus on this, I talked about how responding quickly to address community complaints about gameplay, that's the #1 way to get a community behind you. Quality of life improvements, those are our biggest complaints. In a lot of cases, those are our biggest complaints. So just make it part of this. You don't even have to pick the ones that we want, as long as you are looking at the game and saying, oh, that's a quality of life improvement we could do. That's one, and keep doing them and do them every patch and just do multiple ones every time and talk about which ones you're focusing on. We're going to love you for it. Okay. And then finally, update or replace stale and dissatisfying game elements. There are a ton of gameplay elements, ton of different fights that are stale and dissatisfying. Some of them are just old. Some of them were never designed particularly well in the first place. Some of them just don't feel great. You can change them. You don't have to remove them. You can just update them. You can work on them little bit by little bit, and the community will give you feedback and let you know if you're going in the right direction. But you can keep making Hydra better. You can keep making Iron Twins better. You can add layers to campaign. You could create the hard modes of the dungeons, of the gear dungeons, was one way that you updated an old game element. And it's not awesome. It's not overwhelming. It's not like going to make me forever happy about the game, but it's an improvement. And I think everybody appreciated it. It was a nice improvement and everybody appreciated it. Nobody says that that was awful. It's not enough on its own, but this shouldn't be a major update. That should be a minor update that's sort of added to the game every couple of months. So continue to update or replace stale and dissatisfying game elements. That's going to be great. That's going to be awesome. So now that we've talked about our 3 objectives in terms of how to accomplish the goal, right? The one demand that we have of making the player experience the central focus, right? Player satisfaction, the central focus of Plarium's approach. The question for us as a movement for the No Dime December is the timeline. How long do we do this? How fast does Plarium have to respond? How much do they have to do? And how long will we hold out before we say, we're getting back on board with you. We're not done, but we'll start spending again. And I think there are 4 things that Plarium has to do. I've tried to keep it to 4 in every category here. So the first thing is that Plarium needs to enter into immediate verbal discussions with the community leaders. That's probably going to be content creators. They're already in the content creator program. They already have a relationship with the community liaisons. That's great, but enter into immediate discussions. You'll notice I call them discussions. They're not even negotiations. Just talk to us. Let us know that you hear us. Let us know that you think that we're not crazy. And let us know that you respect that relationship of player to revenue, right? That player satisfaction can drive revenue. Let us know that you're on board with that idea. The second thing is here, we're going to want some measurable movement in the near future. Now, it's not reasonable to expect a development company to just turn around and start creating the stuff that we want instantaneously, right? There's already content coming. We know that there are projects that are ongoing, but we would like to see some measurable, some noticeable movement on some of our desires in the next 60 days. So that'll be by the time you say yes, not 60 days from today, not 60 days from December 1, but 60 days from the moment you say, yeah, we're on board. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky because the player base doesn't trust Plarium. So it's potentially possible that Plarium could agree to something and we're just going to hold out until you actually do it. Like we might not start spending for that 60 days. So if it takes you 45 days to say yes, it might take us 60 days after that to see something, and then a little bit of time before people are like, all right, we trust you again. You know, you could be talking about 6 months of this. That's possible. So I would say get on board as fast as possible and let's see something measurable in the first 60 days after discussions. Now, if we don't see something in 60 days, this could get bad. That would be where it would start to get confrontational. I think up until this point, in those first 60 days, I think everybody's going to be very cooperative. We all want the same thing. We want Raid to do well. We want Plarium to do well. We want the players to do well. As long as we all agree to those 3 things and we're moving in the right direction and it doesn't take more than 60 days, I think everybody's going to be on board. As soon as we cross that mark, in fact, as we get close to that mark, it's going to start to get ugly from the community side. People are going to get unhappy. People are going to grumble. People are going to leave the game in anticipation of the fact that nothing's going to happen. And if on day 60, something doesn't drop, there's going to be a rebellion. People are just going to leave en masse. So I think realistically, you can't push that to like 90 days. Can't do it. It has to be in the first 60 days. I would say even like 30 to 45 days is probably the best window. So if you could beat this deadline, I would do it. Now, from the long range standpoint, I would say this change towards a player-centric model, towards implementing like player satisfaction as the primary core principle of game design, that has to be permanent. You can't backslide. You can't give us something to temporarily shut us up and satisfy us and then go back to the way things were. This change needs to be permanent. It doesn't have to be instantaneous. It can develop over time, but a year from now, the game should be in a healthier place. The player base should be in a happier place. and Plarium should be doing well financially. That is the trifecta. That's what we want. All right, the fourth thing here is ongoing efforts to maintain meaningful two-way communication with community. You can't maintain a player-centric model without an ongoing effort at two-way communication. That means you need to be transparent with us about your decision-making processes. You need to be upfront with us and update us frequently on development directions, on quality of life improvements, on gameplay balances, on patches. All of those things need to be, I mean, the raid digest is a joke, right? We need way, way more lead time. We need more involvement in the conversation, right? And that means that not only do you communicate to us more transparently and more frequently, but that when we communicate to you, you listen. If you don't listen, if you simply make, the gesture, if you're like, yeah, we're listening, but then never take our advice or our feedback as part of the decision-making process, then it's not meaningful. Then it's not communication. Then it's a press release, right? Then it's just you doing what you want without us being part of it. And that's what we don't want anymore. Because what we really want is just one thing. Make player satisfaction your guiding principle. If you do that, even if it doesn't look exactly like I've outlined here, but if you do that, then we'll be happy. We'll spend. We'll play. We'll spread the word of Raid. We'll be happy to champion its cause. And we will, laud the name of Plarium and Aristocrat and say, these are great companies. But all of that has to happen. And it has to be permanent. And it has to happen relatively quickly. Now, players may ask, what about specifics? And I think that that's part of the communication process. I think that from this point onwards, we need to have a conversation. And if we're having a conversation, then we can talk about specifics. Right? This should be enough. These should be enough to get us started. Create a more player-friendly economic model. Make the player experience the core concept of your game design. Focus significant and consistent effort on improving the gameplay that already exists and implementing new, exciting gameplay features in the future. And then fourth, do it in a respectable amount of time. Make that change permanent. Make it a philosophical change at the core of your development process. And then always communicate with us so that we feel like we're included in this community, that players and developers aren't at odds, that we're in cooperative endeavor to make this game as great as it can possibly be. All the specifics of that can be worked out. Every single thing can be worked out. Nobody's going to be happy 100% of the time, but nobody expects to be. No player expects to be happy 100% of the time. But respect us, reward us, give us value, and we will do the same in return. Okay, so that is it for this one. I hope that was interesting to you. I hope it advanced the conversation in some way. Like I said before, if you could put this in front of the eyes of other content creators or other members of the community, I would appreciate that, because I think that hopefully this conversation, this part of the conversation, my perspective, has added value to the overall discussion. And hopefully moving forward, it'll help us be more effective in getting what we need from Plarium so that we continue to play the game. Let me know in the comments below if you have any objections to anything that I outlined, if you think it's going to be an effective way to approach Plarium, or maybe if there are things that we need to add to this outline in order to be more effective. Thanks so much for watching this entire video. I know it was another long one too today, but I really think that this is an important issue, and I hope we get as many people on board as possible. Thanks so much for hanging out. I have been Colred, and I will see you in a gameplay video very soon.